现在中国的各大港口空箱堆积如山，是外贸快不行了吗？我们特地过来看一下。
Right now, at major ports across China, empty containers are piling up like mountains. I don't know if you all remember, but back in 2021, containers were so hard to come by. The video shows empty containers behind the woman piling up 6 layers high. There are no workers around, and aside from containers, almost no one else is in sight.
Here's another piece of bad news, everyone. Ningbo Zhoushan has basically announced that they've stopped running. It's already been shared in the group. They're telling the workers to figure it out themselves and leave voluntarily. The production's already halted over there.
Ningbo Zhoushan primarily produces various international standard dry cargo containers, 45-foot containers, and open-top containers. The man stated that the container shipping company has already stopped production.
Containers, yeah. This year, they've really been underperforming. In fact, there were signs of this happening even before the end of last year.
There is also a report claiming that the number of empty containers piling up at Chinese ports has reached a record 7 layers, and 20,000 truck drivers have no work. At Chinese ports, the maximum allowed stack height for empty containers is 7 layers. It can't go any higher. Ningbo Port, also known as Ningbo Zhoushan Port, is one of China's most important deep water ports. It has maintained a strong position in terms of cargo throughput and container transportation. However, now truck drivers are out of work and shipping rates for route across the Pacific to the US West Coast have dropped by 90%. Despite the container pileups, the Chinese government continues to boast that China's port throughput remains number 1 in the world. On March 30th, People's Daily, the official newspaper of the Chinese Communist Party, reported that in 2024, the national port cargo throughput reached almost 18 billion tons, with container throughput at 330 million TEUs, maintaining the world's top position. Of that, foreign trade cargo throughput was 5.4 billion tons, an increase of 6.9%. Port container throughput stood at 332 million TEUs, an increase of 7%. By the end of 2024, the Chinese government media also claimed that Shanghai Port had led the world for 15 consecutive years in container throughput, surpassing 15 million TEUs. However, a Chinese captain familiar with port conditions revealed the truth behind this claim. He disclosed to foreign media that China's port throughput data has been manipulated for years. It's been happening for over 10 years, and everyone in the industry knows. They fake it every year. How else can we show we are a major power? We are the world's second largest economy, and it is for the leadership's image. The captain explained that imports and exports are linked internationally, so port throughput data can be verified with data from other countries. However, the number from China do not match up, with discrepancies between the import-export figures, sales, and container counts. The practice of manipulating port throughput has long been an open secret in the industry. According to social media posts from a user named Captain Xue in LA, from south to north along China's coast, ports like Xinzhou, Yangpu, Nasha, Ningbo, Shanghai, Tianjin, and others are involved. Some ships carry 4,000 empty containers moving in and out of ports all day. Each time a ship docks, the shipping company is given a bonus. The more often the ship docks, the more bonuses they receive. Some captains can earn up to 80,000 yuan a month just from this. Some large container ships dock and immediately leave without unloading any containers, even though theoretically unloading should take 13 or 16 hours. The captain, interviewed by international media, stated that the relevant Chinese authorities are aware of the manipulation but are covering it up to maintain the country's image. He explained that the manipulation of port throughput data is similar to the falsification of China's GDP and population figures. This is not a secret, but it is a coordinated effort, and the international community has little recourse. Normally, these data could be verified, but the Chinese government does not allow independent investigations, unlike in the US, where journalists can scrutinize and criticize openly. The captain said that the government's claim of having the world's highest port throughput is all for show, and many in the industry, including captains and crew, are upset by the manipulation because they see so much money being wasted. He remarked, "You're busy all the time, and all you spend is money. If that money was saved, imagine how many pensions could be given to farmers." So, how is the data manipulated? The captain explained, "If there's a cargo, it's unloaded and counted as your throughput. Now, whether it's an empty or loaded container, it's just being moved around and are all empty boxes. What happens when there's no unloading? Captain Xue in LA revealed that at the port, a handling order is given to containers that aren't actually unloaded, and the first mate, the captain's main assistant, is asked to sign it. The first mate hesitates to sign, worried about unloading fees, so the shipping company tells him to record an audio note first and sign later, with the recording later erased. He provided a typical example of how port throughput data is manipulated. Between Yangpu in Hainan and Qingzhou in Guangxi, large container ships are used to move empty boxes, with each round trip adding 10,000 containers to the throughput of each port. Overseas shipping companies are also involved in this manipulation. The ports and shipping companies signed unloading agreements before the year began, such as guaranteeing that the shipping company would handle 1 million containers at the port annually, with a reward of 50 million yuan. By the end of the year, when it became clear that the target wasn't met, the solution was to move empty containers back and forth to make up the numbers. All parties involved were willing to participate as port management is a state-monopolized industry, and the manipulation was directed by higher authorities. By creating inflated throughput records, all parties benefit, and leaders gain political capital for promotions, making it a win-win situation. The interviewed captain frankly stated that this practice is forcing people into unethical behavior, as domestic ports are monopolized and mainly government-controlled. Even when some ports are foreign-owned, he remarked, now the party committee calls the shot. Ports and shipping companies sign agreements to handle a certain number of containers each year, and in return, they get bonuses, some of which are in the millions. Even though the shipping companies can't meet the targets, they still sign, and after the manipulation, they get their bonuses. The final cost is primarily borne by the ports. The captain explained that the ports don't care as long as they still appear busy, which allow ports officials to gain promotions, but the real costs are ultimately passed on to the shipping companies. As a direct user of port services, shipping companies must pay for port service fees, including docking fees and cargo handling fees. The captain also noted that handling fees for large containers are monopolized by the port, and since the port has pricing power, it sets high handling fees, which increases cost for the shipping companies. There have recently been numerous reports on social media discussing how Chinese ports and the freight industry cooperates in data manipulation. One commenter revealed that they often pass by a particular port where normally there aren't many trucks or cargo ships. However, whenever a high-ranking official visits, especially important leaders, many trucks are suddenly dispatched to queue outside the port and make their way in and out. Several cargo ships are also seen entering and leaving the port, and the gantry cranes are busy creating the appearance of a bustling scene. Once the leaders leave, the ports return to its quiet state. Another user shared a similar story, though with slight variations. A ship leaves Ningbo Port fully loaded, travels north to ports like Qingdao, Dalian, and Jingzhou, then turns around and heads south to Hong Kong to unload empty containers. Afterwards, it picks up containers from various coastal ports and returns to Ningbo. This process is counted as import and export data. We are in the container shipping business, and many inland ports do this too. The same batch of empty containers is repeatedly transferred between several ports. Which industry in China doesn't engage in falsification? Over 20 years ago, it was already widespread, though not on the scale it is today. I remember once working on a renovation project with customers. The unit price was around 10,000 yuan, but the leader told me to inflate it to 130,000 yuan for the contract. They gave me 15,000 yuan, and after paying taxes, the rest was directly withdrawn by them. Halfway through the project, the payment was already settled. Inflating by 13 times was considered normal. I've seen projects inflated by 20 to 30 times. Falsifying research data is even more common. In a country like this, how can it function without such practices? Perhaps the data is inflated by including through cargo. Most empty containers these days are unloaded in Ningbo, Beilun, or Shanghai Yangshan Port. If shipping lines stop at a few coastal ports, they will unload containers as needed, not just at one port. Civil aviation freight throughput is the same. They constantly transport worthless goods back and forth. Even Shanghai's container trucks are part of the manipulation, clogging up highways with containers every day. Details decide success or failure. The government gets credit for export growth, a prosperous foreign trade image, and a long-lasting political legacy. Another social media user, Captain Share in LA, also mentioned that the result of this manipulation is that Shanghai's container throughput exceeds the entire United States. Several years ago, we had a conversation with officials from the National Development and Reform Commission and the Ministry of Transport about this issue. After thinking it over, they concluded that it was necessary to maintain the country's image. Therefore, the matter was not further reported. This widespread manipulation is clearly known to the leadership. Influencer Zhang Yao commented on this post. It's laughable that China's port throughput data is manipulated. Shanghai's container throughput is even higher than that of the entire US. Another user commented, which data from China can we believe is real? Here, trucks also pretend to drive around to create traffic flow, and factory machines are required to run idle to increase electricity usage. It's really a unique feature. This is a serious issue. Many international investment institutions and China research institutions use these import and export data for analysis. Also, foreign propaganda depends on these shiny numbers to back up their narratives. If it's exposed as fake, it will completely rewrite the rules. Aside from data manipulation, the port industry is concerned about hidden risk in China's port cargo throughput. In 2024, global container shipping demand surged, driving growth at major global ports. However, the global economy is growing slowly, and part of the shipping demands comes from goods being shipped to avoid tariffs. This presents challenges for future foreign trade. China's port also faces shortcomings in container throughput. For example, in 2023, the National Container Rail Water intermodal volume was about 11.5 million TEUs, but it accounted for only 3.5% of total port container throughput, falling short of the 14th five-year plan target. As for cargo throughput, imports of coal and iron ore set new records, but coal consumption remains weak and iron ore stockpiles remain high. With the global economy growing at a slower pace and trade rules being reshaped, port freight growth will face immense pressures. Falsified throughput data directly affects custom data. Last year, the United States publicly questioned why there was a significant discrepancy between China's custom data and the trade surplus figures reported by the State Administration of Foreign Exchange. On June 21, 2024, Bloomberg reported that on June 20th, the U.S. Department of the Treasury noted in its semi-annual foreign exchange report that in the first half of 2024, Chinese customs reported a trade surplus of $823 billion for 2023. However, the State Administration of Foreign Exchange reported a surplus of $594 billion, a difference of nearly $230 billion. $230 billion accounts for more than 1% of China's GDP. Since 2000, the average discrepancy between these two figures has only been around $7 billion. Brad Setzer, a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and a former official at the U.S. Department of the Treasury, remarked at the time that the difference was significant and raised questions about some of the adjustments China had made to its data. The U.S. Department of the Treasury called on Beijing to clarify why these figures differ. However, the Chinese government has not provided a direct explanation. A spokesperson for the General Administration of Customs only stated that the difference between the two data sets is due to different statistical principles and valuation methods. When discussing China's port cargo throughput, it's impossible not to mention the potential impact of the US-China trade war, particularly when the Trump administration proposed high entry fees for Chinese-built ships and transport vessels from Chinese shipping companies. According to Nikkei Asian Review on March 27, China currently controls 70% of global new ship orders and 40% of maritime trade. Estimates suggest that if the US enacts the proposed measures, major shipping companies docking at US ports could face an additional $20 billion in cost annually, potentially leading to trade disruptions and stagnation. During a hearing on March 24, the Trump administration introduced a proposal to charge fees for Chinese ships entering U.S. ports. According to a proposal by the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, USTR, Chinese-made ships arriving at U.S. ports could face up to $1.5 million in fees per entry. Even ships built in other countries but operated by Chinese shipping companies would be subject to this fee. Soren Toft, CEO of the world's largest shipping company, Mediterranean Shipping Company (MSC), warned that such measures would have serious consequences for the industry. He added that if the entry fee restrictions were implemented, shipping companies would be unable to bear the additional cost, and ultimately consumers would have to pay for it. Global container shipping rates have continued to decline. As a key route, shipping costs from Shanghai to the US West Coast dropped to their lowest level since December 2023 in early March. Shipping costs to the US East Coast also dropped by nearly 50% compared to the end of last year, with the rush to ship before tariffs weakening. This move by the US would directly impact China's shipping and logistics giant COSCO, which is the largest shipping company in the world. According to the US government data, as of January 2024, COSCO and other large state-owned enterprises from China operates about 90% of the global commercial fleet. On top of that, more than half of the cargo ships, tankers, and other ocean vessels built globally in 2023 were constructed in Chinese shipyards. The proposal would also affect large non-Chinese companies such as Maersk and MSC, which have purchased many ships from Chinese shipyards. Typically, large container ships dock at multiple US ports, which could mean a significant increase in fees. Whether it's port throughput or the entry fees for shipping vessels, these issues are tied to the ships themselves. Recently, the US has taken a more aggressive stance in the shipbuilding industry, which could have an impact on China. In March, President Trump announced the creation of a national shipbuilding office. On March 4th, he stated in a speech to Congress, to boost our defense industrial base, we're also going to resurrect American shipbuilding, including commercial shipbuilding and military shipbuilding. He added that tax incentives will be used to promote the development of the domestic shipbuilding industry. The U.S. Office of Shipbuilding will coordinate actions to support the struggling domestic shipbuilding industry, among other goals. At the end of World War II, the U.S. had more than 100 shipyards, and its merchant fleet, which flew the U.S. flag, was the largest in the world, carrying 57% of U.S. trade. The majority of global trade was also carried by ships built in the U.S. Today, China builds over 50% of the world's commercial shipping tonnage and is the largest shipbuilding country, with shipbuilding capacity 232 times greater than the U.S. According to a report from the U.S. Congressional Research Service, 3 out of the 10 commercial tankers selected by the U.S. Department of Defense for fuel transport were built in China. Additionally, 7 out of 12 new dry cargo ships used by the Department of Defense were also built in China. U.S. military expert Mike Frendenberg wrote on March 26 that this means the U.S. Navy and even the entire U.S. economy is heavily dependent on ships built in foreign countries, including China. This is undoubtedly a dangerous situation. The new National Shipbuilding Office set by the President Trump is aimed at addressing this national security risk and restoring America's status as a maritime power. As a result, implementing these measures is not optional, but a necessary task. In response to the U.S. awakening, whether it's the high entry fees or Chinese ships and shipping companies, or the revitalization of the U.S. shipbuilding industry, these moves will have a significant impact on China. As for the farcical situation surrounding China's port throughput, the more the falsification continues, the harder it becomes to hide the uncomfortable truth. China's port industry is likely sailing on a bloated surface, and it's only a matter of time before the cracks show.